scenarios going forward. The best case scenario, we cannot predict that will be certain to keep us even below that 4-degree level, which I'm saying is going to be devastating. The conclusion from the University College London Lancet Commission report, that joint study, which came out about the same time as our risk assessment analysis, is shown here. Climate change is the greatest global health threat of the 21st century. I hope you understand. I believe that climate change is a threat to our global civilization. Our economic system cannot survive the kind of threats we've understood from this analysis. Thank you very much.
I think it brings home once again why we're here today, what we need to do when we go back, and the disastrous consequences if we do not carbonize our economy in the shortest time possible.
Our focus is on wildlife traders. That is our niche. We do terrestrial and marine species. I've been with Traffic for 15 plus years now, and for the majority of that time my work has been focused on marine resource trade. I'm based in Cape Town, so for much of that time, and collaborated really quite extensively, not only with DAF, as you would have heard from Bernie. That wasn't a setup. Bernie referring to Traffic. We've had the most wonderful collaboration with any of his colleagues over the last 10 or more years. Just last week, we ran a fisheries data analysis training program with about 20 DAF officials, and really pleased to see quite a number of them are at the symposium as well. The collaboration mentioned a number of times already, and ours is a good example of the way in which an NGO can work with government agencies. So, a very simple presentation really for me today. I'm going to be talking about the challenges that are faced with seafood trade, focusing on international trade. I want to be looking at domestic trade and those challenges. I'll be drawing predominantly on examples from South Africa. I'm going to be talking, just to warn you, I'll be talking again about abalone and rock lobster. I know Bernie covered them, but they really are, I know those situations, those trade issues well, and in a way they're kind of like the poster child of fish crime and related trade. They are such strong, unfortunately, South Africa, very damaging examples of fish crime. And then at the end I'll discuss some solutions for addressing the challenges. Okay, so this is a sort of standard trade chain. You've got fish at sea being pulled from boat to plate, and you have a whole lot of controls right through that system from the time it's landed. The first point of sale buyer, you've got the processor, the trader, get exported, imported then, goes into the retail restaurant system and is bought by a consumer and is eaten. And you've got systems at each point in that trade chain for monitoring these controls, and a variety of agencies with a mandate for that enforcement. Now, I think arguably the strongest measures and the most expensive measures are those that take place at sea. So you've got your observers, you've got VMS, AIS, at sea patrols, and then at landing as well, you've got fisheries control officers monitoring discharges. And I think probably justifiably so that you want to expend a lot of effort, compliance effort at sea. You want to keep the resource in the sea at sustainable levels. Once it's been illegally harvested, the stock has been impacted. So I think justifiably, but it's the very expensive end of compliance. And right through this trade chain, every single opportunity there is an opportunity to disrupt. Wherever you've got a controlled measure that can be enforced, you have an opportunity to disrupt. And I think if we just reflect on that pyramid that Yves showed yesterday, the more opportunities for disrupting illegal catch and trade, I think the higher we can get in that pyramid and the just attitudes and behavior. So you also have fisheries control officers, enforcement officials playing a role through the trade chain. They will check, for instance, processing establishments, check invoices, permits, and so on at various stages. In some cases, but not always, you'll have fisheries compliance officials playing a role at border posts, imports, so monitoring import and export of seafood. But that's not always the case. That's often where customs plays that predominant role. And as we know, there's not enough interaction between customs and fisheries. There's an assumption, I think, that by fisheries that, well, the trade is largely international trade. That's being largely regulated by customs, although it is within their mandate. And then, you know, the thing about all those trade-related activities is that at every point in that trade chain, there's a permit, and that permit's got information on it. There's a lot of data that's being collected right through that period. And my experience is that that data is not being analysed sufficiently. I think we have far more of a focus on analysing the at-sea data, the catch data, the VMS data, the observer data. There's a huge untapped data resource that's linked to the trade chain. Not enough cross-referencing, not enough comparative analysis. Yeah, I think from a compliance point of view, this trade chain as well, it provides enormous challenges. Those challenges are also opportunities, of course. But you've got, you know, seafood being traded in a processed form. It could be dried, it could be filleted, frozen. If it's in a container, as Bernie showed, you know, you're facing a huge task. So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples that just highlight the challenges, reflecting again as well on the potential for improved data, trade data analysis, and how that can contribute to tackling fish crime. So this is a photo that I took about 4 years ago, I guess, in Dubai, UAE, and these are sharks that came across from Oman. There were about 4 or 5 freezer trucks that came over, and apparently these trips are happening almost daily. They're brought at night to the night market, to the fish market in Dubai, and they then bought and finned. I don't know what happens to the meat. I wasn't there long enough to watch the transaction and any processing, but you know, the main market here is for the fins. And it's quite a gruesome photo, but really just this whole long kind of wharf, just all these big dead sharks lying there. Most of them were big-eyed thresher sharks, which catch is prohibited by IOTC for IOTC member states and cooperating non-contracting parties. And Oman's a member of IOTC. I don't know whether the vessels were caught by an Oman flag vessel, but they came from Oman. So at some point, the catch wasn't in compliance with an RFMO provision. Now they're in trade though. And from this point onwards, the trade will be legal. There's no need for anything to be hidden. For any misdeclaration to take place, the trade can be completely legal. Then we have smooth, I think it's a smooth hammerhead, which at the time was not listed on CITES, but it now is, and it requires CITES trade documentation. And you know, for a compliance official at each point in this, to be able to firstly identify the shark to a species level and know, oh, this is a hammerhead shark, of a species that's covered by CITES, or that species is not meant to be caught in terms of an RFMO. What does the documentation look like? What should the species look like? Once the fins have been cut off now, the fins have to be identified to a species level. So there are, you know, significant challenges for trade-related compliance enforcement. So, Bernie spoke this morning about abalone poaching and trade, and It really provides one of the most dramatic examples of fisheries crime. I really feel almost perhaps all wildlife crime on the African continent. I know we've faced the moment of the real crisis with rhino poaching, with elephant poaching. But this is a crisis of its own, if not having as much of an impact on the species, but the social impacts are devastating. It's syndicated crime that's been involved, drugs, local gangs, corruption, you name it. It's all bundled in here. This graph shows abalone poaching estimates over the last, since 2000, so 15 years. And we've developed this looking at imports of abalone into the key importing countries, and then comparing that with what could be legally produced in South Africa through mariculture and through the legal fishery, and doing a simple calculation of what could be legally produced and what's actually being imported. But it's not really something that many customs agencies actually, that they do. This is also based on an analysis of trade data, but in this case we're looking at values. And what's interesting about this graph, I'm showing you this graph, is because it shows that this is just for Hong Kong, it's just for dried abalone, but it's showing that abalone's being imported not just from South Africa, but from Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, and Kenya. Now, our species is an endemic species. There's a very small abalone farm in Namibia. The bottom line is that South Africa really should be the only country that's exporting any sizable quantities of abalone, and a small amount from Namibia. There's no processing outside of South Africa. Anything that's coming from those other countries is guaranteed to be poached abalone. Some of them are landlocked, Zimbabwe, Zambia, landlocked countries. So, important information for compliance to know the trade routes. So then that also gives information on focusing on specific border posts, working with counterparts in those countries to make them aware of this dynamic, seeing what possible legal processes could be developed for tackling trade once it's left the country. We also don't know if it's actually always all physically leaving the country. One possibility could be that it's going into the bonded warehouse, let's say at Tambo International Airport up in Johannesburg. It never leaves the country, but forged permits are produced that show that it's in the bonded warehouse and it's come through Zambia. It's now caught illegally. Once it's in the bonded warehouse with the forged documents, it's now legally in trade. And I'm not sure if this is what's happening. It's a possibility, but it could be apparently a way then for organized crime to get forex into countries where they have operations. If they need to get money into Zambia, they can show that there's a trade with Zambia, the product they need to pay the exporter in Zambia. Now that facilitates money laundering. These sorts of things, this sort of information, can be really useful in generating interest from other agencies. Financial Intelligence Center in this country and equivalent agencies in other countries that are trying to follow the money that's linked to organized crime. This sort of information I know is useful and valuable to them. I'd also just like you to look, probably can't see the numbers, especially at the back, but this is a value related graph. So we're looking at most years between, let's say, $30 and $40 million in value, of which the majority of that would be illegal. Now, if you convert that into South African rands, just for the dried abalone, that's a lot of money. It's a good way to get Treasury interested, to motivate for increased budgets for compliance. They're not going to be that interested in 2,000 tons of poached abalone being exported legally, but they're going to be very interested if you tell them that they're losing, up to R1 billion a year in illegally. There's loss of revenue and the other impacts. I'll just have to move on a bit. So I will just briefly explain how is this possible. But essentially what is happening is that the product is being caught illegally, and through the trade system it's being turned into a legal product. This is what happened with the Bengals case as well, what happens with abalone. The big risk is in the country where you're exporting the product. That's where most of the enforcement is, that's where the concern is. So you pack your abalone, your lobster, whatever it is, into a container with whatever else it might be, polypropylene balls, duvets, plastic bags, you name it, and you misdeclare it. It could be car spares, bathroom accessories, computers. It doesn't container. Exported as sardines. I'm not sure what would have happened on the import side because they got the container turned back, but if they'd been sensible, they would have declared it as abalone and sardines together in a container so as not to risk misdeclaration. Very briefly then, I only have a few minutes left. This is the Bengals case as well. So what I was interested, I looked back in about 2012 to see, well, what did the trade data look like if we compared what South Africa exported to the US at the time when Bengals was operating with what the US reported as imports. And as expected, there's a big difference. There's that big bubble, Bengals bubble there. And that's the difference. The difference is really what was being poached and exported illegally because there was no risk on the import side of declaring it as abalone. What was interesting in subsequent years, though, is that it hasn't gone away. And Bernie said, can't give any details, but there are ongoing investigations into illegal lobster poaching and trade. And my thinking was, as Bernie said, if they hadn't had that informant telling them about the Bengals trade to the US, it could have gone on for years. If someone had been doing data analysis in 98, 99 and seen this big difference, maybe they would have alerted and said, look, you've got to look, but particularly at consignments that are going out to the US, we think that's where our poached abalone is going. Lobster. To summarize the challenges, the international trade system makes it too easy to order illegally caught fish. It's very difficult to change the system. The HS, the RMI system, the standardized system, often doesn't contain sufficient detail of fish products, frozen fish other or something. It doesn't tell you that it's a hammerhead shark. But sometimes import data can provide that level of detail, which it does, for instance, with abalone. So it's about understanding the systems. Insufficient interagency cooperation, especially between customs and fisheries. That's both within a country, but also between countries. The capacity to deal with these massive volumes of fish products in international trade makes inspection very challenging. Numerous trade documents, knowledge of the requirements, the confidence to know exactly what is required with a trade situation, what document is needed, what should be written on that document, how does that match up with what's in the box. Identification of especially processed fish products in trade, and then corruption, which has been mentioned a couple of times this morning already. Solutions. This is a big thing for me, and analysis of trade data. Quite a few of you here today have heard me, I've been banging this drum for many years, but I think we know by now that this can add value to compliance efforts. There's so much data out there, and we live in an age where access to that data is easy. There's software applications that can bring this disparate data together, do the analysis, do the cross-referencing, and make us more informed of people tackling fish crime about what happens to that product after it's left the sea, after it's hit the wharf. Somehow it ends up being legal on a plate in a restaurant, in a retail outlet somewhere across the world. Explore to deal with the problem with import and export permits. See what is possible working within the WCO and the HS system to move towards electronic permitting, to move towards a single import-export permit. Something needs to be done to address a system that is not helping us, is working against us. Continuous efforts like with the symposium to build interagency collaboration. And then we have a real opportunity to actively engage. We've got some fantastic international institutions. We heard yesterday from UNODC, there's the WCO, Interpol. We heard from Interpol as well yesterday, CITES, to build capacity and to obtain and share information for future collaboration. And my last slide, corruption. tackle corruption. Building knowledge on capacity on trade document requirements, the assessment of those documents, validation of those documents, continuous capacity building really, and the same for species identification. And I am done, so thank you very much.
In this instance, I'm going to talk about water and memory. I'm going to talk about really fundamental memory that water has. And my story is going to begin, and you need to draw a little mental picture of this, of a stream somewhere up in the mountains. Could be any mountains, anywhere. And a group of people are told that this particular stream, where this valley is and that those mountains, is absolutely one of the most scenic areas in the whole world. And so they get together and decide to travel and visit the stream and do this wonderful hike in nature. So they travel right across continents with all their gear. They move by rail, train, bus, whatever, and they get to this wonderful scenic scene. And they start their walk. And right beside them is this little stream coming down off the mountain. This little stream, at that point, is basically pristine. It has very, very, very little sign of any nutrient, of any pollution. And the hikers walk along and the scenes are magic. And of course it's a hot day, so they put on suntan lotion and creams on their lips. And as would be the case, it gets hotter and hotter, so they decide to have a swim in one of the pools that this little stream has. So off they go and have a swim, and now they wash off the suntan lotion and all the creams that they've been having smeared over their bodies. And on top of that, they actually also release some body fluids into that stream. After all, it's in the middle of nowhere, so who's it going to affect? I mean, it's just a few of us here, you know. It's going to be washed away. It will be just dissipated in the mass of water. However, some of the party have been taking some antibiotics. Some of the ladies are on birth control tablets. And some of them actually have a urinary disease. And so at that point, they introduce what would be the first beginnings of pollution and toxic elements. And this is where the memory begins. That stream takes that little plug of the first pollutant and the first nutrients and takes it on its way down the mountain. And so the hikers carry on hiking, they finish their hike, and they end up at a village. And this village is very rural. It has the most rudimentary sewage systems. But again, they note that this sewage system discharges into the same stream that they have just been walking along. And so the nutrient levels increase. And as they walk down the valley, so the villages get larger and larger. And then they come into an agricultural area and they see the farmers are busy farming away. And they are spraying their crops with water from the stream. But they also notice that there's some machines growing up and down spraying pesticide. And again, this is washed off into this little stream. So the memory in the stream, this water is actually carrying all these bits of memory down, all the way down to where it eventually will end up, either in a great big dam or out into the sea. Now we think that, you know, the water will wash away the sins of the world, but it really doesn't anymore. It may have done so many hundreds of years ago, but it doesn't do that anymore. Because what we are actually producing in terms of our toxic, I'll put it in inverted commas, our toxic chemicals are today so potent and are so powerful that they have an enormous effect when released into nature. There are, I think, 6 rivers in England that are highly protected. All the people that live along the banks of those rivers have to sign and agree that they will do absolutely nothing to damage the river. And about 2 years ago, I think, someone released about 2 or 3 tablespoons of a toxic poison into the river. It ended up killing every bit of marine life, fish life, for a distance of over 6 miles down that river. And that was literally from 1 or 2 tablespoons of toxic. So we produce all these chemicals and we actually don't really fully understand, in all our cleverness, we don't really fully understand what happens when they're unleashed into nature. So the memory I'm talking about is really how water will carry down and along its path what we do on its banks. And today, facing probably 70% of the dams is this huge problem of cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria, or blue-green or blue algae as it's commonly known, will become prevalent because it is fed. It is fed by over fertilization on farmers' lands, high volumes of nitrates and phosphates running off the fields into the stream and from there into the dam. And I think you might remember just recently, one of the big lakes, one of the cities off the big lake, they suddenly had a cyanobacteria bloom, and they had to, I think there were 500,000 people or 600,000 people that had to be told immediately not to use any water out of their taps. And they had to bring the army in and tanker water, and this would be a modern American city. So it can happen anywhere. And what we have to start really working at is how we change and look after or modify or reduce the memory of these things that the water is carrying down. So we can do something at point A, seemingly very innocuous. It travels down and many kilometers, maybe even miles, hundreds of miles away, we will have effect B. And it's related because of the memory that is carried by the water. If we actually think carefully about it, it can be really simple everyday precautions that we can take to minimize. At this stage, the message that I think needs to get across is how do we minimize this memory? How do we make that memory as small as possible? And this goes right into the rural villages, it goes into the cities, it goes into every tier of humanity. That we have to start to change the way that we actually consider water. Today, water has been made very ubiquitous to the availability of very ubiquitous to almost all of humanity. But what I was actually amazed to read or hear on the news just a couple of days ago, it's now World Water Week at the moment, and 4 countries in the world use 60% of all the drinking water available.
Is that because of the quantity?
Yes. China being one of them, India being another, obviously massive population, America being another. And the rest of the world, take those countries away, are down to the other 40%. Agriculture uses about 48%, and human consumption requires approximately 12%. So there are at the moment massive amounts of water that are being used within certain spheres or in certain tiers. And if that memory goes into those, that effect on that becomes that much greater. So if you look at the issue of the antibiotics, for instance, when you take an antibiotic, you don't consume it. You know, you swallow the tablets or the fluid. It stays in your body for a period of time, and you excrete it complete as it is. It carries on down into the water, and carries on being an antibiotic. So we just don't lose. It doesn't get dissipated. And if we look at the sewage systems of the world that are still discharging massive amount of sewage, we're discharging over 786,000 tons of effluent into the seas on our coast in South Africa per day. Well, the days of that being dissipated and gone, I'm afraid are just not happening, because the toxicity levels of those discharges are so high that you can't tell the fish, well, sorry, there's that bubble of toxicity, don't swim in that. That fish is going to swim through that. And of course we know that mercury is so high now that there are some places that are advocating you only have fish once a month because the mercury levels have become so high. Now that is indicative of the fact that the water is actually not able to dissipate, or the sheer population numbers are so great that we are not dissipating or able to dissipate the mercury in a small enough quantity for it to be safe, because it gets into the fish and there it remains in the flesh. So if we talk about memory, what I want to put across here is that if we consider how we behave and how we treat water, we need to understand that what we do to that water, we don't damage the water. H2O is H2O. We can pour it down the side of a mountain for thousands of feet and bash it off the rocks and it still comes up as water at the bottom. We can boil it and steam it away. It'll just reconstitute again. So we don't actually damage the H2O. What damage we do is what we add to the H2O. And that is not fully appreciated in many, many instances. So the actual molecules of hydrogen and oxygen themselves, they remain intact, but they are incredibly efficient as a solvent to carry away and move these various bits and pieces, and that is the memory that I'm trying to put across here. So if we think to ourselves, well, if we do this to this water, we're putting something into it, and that something we put into it is like putting something into your brain.